Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope everybody's excited to start work today and get your work finished so that you can enjoy the rest of the evening. Um, I am going to continue my lesson with you on rounding to the nearest hundred. We're going to still be estimating numbers using those benchmark numbers, which are in the middle of two numbers, which is the halfway mark between two numbers. We're going to talk about compatible numbers eventually. We've not done that yet, but we're still talking about just the rounding portion of estimation. And we're going to be explaining estimation and rounding and how they're similar to one another and how they're different and how we can determine which one gives us the better estimate. We're also going to continue talking about how we can know that we're successful with this particular skill, and that is when we can use models or drawings or explain our understanding in regards to rounding. So let's just jump right in and get started for today. Today we're going to be looking at this task. This task is asking us to plot numbers on the number line, which sometimes can be a little difficult when there's not lines in between. So I'm going to take my cursor here and show you when there's not lines in between, but we see that from 0 to the next number, it's 100 hops. So we actually have 100 little hops within that one big jump. And it's the same way all the way across. So our number line here is a distance between each number is 100. So from 0 to 100 is 100. From 100 to 200 is another 100. So we're going to try to decide where on this number line would these fall. We've got to keep in mind as we look at this number line, what is that middle number going to be between 100 and 0? So I'm going to give you a second to think about that. Hopefully you get a number in your mind before I tell you what that number is. So between each number on this number line, it's going to have a 50. So from 0 to 100, the middle number is 50. So remember what we did last week with our tens, rounding to the nearest 10. Anything that was 5 or above, we rounded to the higher 10. Now we're going to use that same knowledge to help us decide how to round to the nearest 100. So the middle number is going to be 50. So here it would be 50. Here it'd be 150. 250 right in the middle. So keep that in mind as we're putting these numbers on the number line. So the first number that we have is 69. I'm going to come up here and grab this red dot, and I'm going to pull that dot down to, I know that it's not less than 50, but just a little bit greater. So I'm going to place that number line on the number line down here. So it's a little bit more than half. I'm going to do the same thing for 482. So I know that 482, because of that 4 in the hundreds place, that it's going to be at least 400, and it could be 500. So I'm going to look at that number and I'm going to decide, is it greater than 450 or less than 450? And we all know that 482 is greater than 450. So I know it's going to be more than the halfway mark between the two numbers. Just ignore that red line. That's just for my PowerPoint itself, not necessarily for making it half in the number line, no. The next number is 931. Again, I'm going to look at that hundreds place value. It's a 9, so I know it's going to be 900, but it could also be close to 1,000. So I'm going to grab that dot and I'm going to think, is it greater than 950 or is it less than 950? So I already know that 931 is less than 550 or 950, I'm sorry, and I'm going to pull it down on my number line. So let's now look at that number line and decide what each of those would round to. So if I'm looking at the 69, I know it's more than halfway between, and it's going toward the 100. So 69 would round to 100. If I'm looking at 482, again, I'm going to look at that same thing. It's more than halfway to 500. So 482 would round to 500. 931, I know it's less than half, and it's closer to 900 on the number line, so it's going to round to 900. We're going to do the same thing, except for this time we're going to round to the nearest 10 and to the nearest 100. And I want you to tell me which one would give us the best estimate. If I'm looking at trying to get a good estimate, which would give me the best estimate? Would it be rounding to the nearest 10 or rounding to the nearest 100? So we're going to keep that in mind as we work through this particular one. The first number that we have is 7. I know that 7 is between 0 and 100 if I'm looking at this number line. But I also know that it's really, really close to 0 on this particular number line. So I'm going to place it really close to 0. Not quite on 0, but close. The next number is 352. I know because of that 3 in the hundreds place that it's going to be at least 300. But I've got to decide, is it going to be right in the middle of that line, or would it be just a little bit to the right because it's a little bit more than 350. The next thing that I'm going to do is look at 871. Again, I'm going to look at the 8 in the hundreds place. It's telling me that it's at least 800. And I also know that it's greater than 850, so it's going to be a little bit closer to 900 on this number line. When you're rounding to the nearest 100 on the number line, you're going to look to, and you're going to be learning a song. You heard it yesterday if you listened to the video, that it said look to your right. So when I'm rounding to the nearest 100, I'm going to look to the right at this tens place. The tens place is kind of going to give us the indication what to do to the hundreds. So even on this number line, it's going to prove it. If I'm rounding to the nearest 100, am I going to round 7 to 0, or am I going to round it to 100? In this case, I'm going to round it to 0 because it's closest to 0. So if I'm rounding to the nearest 100, I'm going to round the first number to 0. And I'm going to type that in here so that you can see what we're rounding those numbers to. So 7 would round to 0. So if we're looking at that line, the numbers at the top. 352. We know it's more than 350, so that means if we're pulling that number line like we saw yesterday, which I thought was really cool, and one of the students used it in their explanation yesterday, if you pull that number line up like a roller coaster, and I have a ball at the top of it, and that would be at 350, 352 is going to be on this side, so actually it's going to let that ball roll down because of gravity. It's going to roll down to the higher number, which is going to be 400. So this one would round to 400. 352 would round to 400 on this number line. And the same thing would happen with this 871. If I pull that number line up and it's curving down, that 871 is going to be on this side, so gravity is going to pull it this way. So it's going to actually round to 900. Now let's see what happens to those numbers if I'm rounding to the nearest 10. Here's where we're going to get to see which place value gives us the best estimate. Because when we're estimating, we want the number that's closest to the original. So let's think about to the nearest 10. What two tens is 7 between? And if you said from 0 to 10, you are correct. It's between 0 and 10. Is 7 closer to 0 or is it closer to 10? If we're thinking about that middle number between that 5, we know that 7 is greater. So if we're going to round, it's going to round to 10. What about 852? So we know that if I'm looking at that 50 is, that 352 is between 300 and 400 if we're looking at the hundreds place value, but what two tens is it between? So there it changes those numbers up just a tad. We know that 352 is between 350 and 360. So what would it round to? If I'm looking at the tens place value, is it going to round to 350 or is it going to round to 360? And I hope you said 350, because if I'm looking at that number, 352 is less than 355, which is going to let it round down to 350. And let's think about 871. If I'm thinking about 871, I also know that if I'm looking at that tens place value and it's a 7, I know it's going to be between 870 and 880. So I know that 871 is closer to 870 based on our knowledge of 875 being the middle number. So it's going to round to 870. Now let's look at those numbers. If I look at the hundreds chart that we rounded, the hundreds numbers, I'm sorry, it's not a chart, but it's the hundreds numbers, and then I look at the rounding to the nearest 10, which one gave us the closest answers to the original numbers? So in this one, 7 rounds to 0, 352 rounds to 400, 871 rounds to 900. Which is closer? 10 is what 7 rounded to, 352 rounded to 350, 871 rounded to 870. Which is going to give us the best answer? I hope you said rounding to the nearest 10 gives you the best estimate. Do we always need to do that? It depends on what the problem says or what our needs are in real world. If our needs are to get as close to the original answer as possible, then we would want to round to the lowest place value that we can. And in this case, we would round to the tens. Today, I want you to listen to the song again, and I'm going to play that really quickly for you. If you're in my small group, you're going to be learning this song today and the motions that go with it. If you were in my group yesterday, I want you to practice those motions so we have that down. Let me move my screen over really quickly for you. So what you're going to be doing today is you're actually going to be doing boom cards. You're going to click the link, make sure that you choose your name so that you can get credit for the work that you're going to do today. And I hope everybody has a great day. See you soon.